We are not meant to live alone. We are meant to live in complex social groups. We're not meant to live in harsh and critical environments. We're meant to grow and thrive in environments of people who think we're awesome, delight in us, who are eager to hear what our experience is, and who are willing in exchange for that to offer their experience of their own life. And what you find from that, of course, is this richness that is simply unavailable if you don't do it. You have your perspective, you have your conditioning, you see everything in the way that allows you to, and somebody else sees it in the way that they're allowed to. And the exchange of those 2 points of view creates an unfathomable depth of experience that is completely unavailable to you if you just rely on your own point of view. How do you understand this life that we have, this crazy, wild human life that we have, if you're just stuck in your own point of view? You can't see anything.
Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism. This is a podcast exploring how we can best maintain a sense of energy, inspiration, and wakefulness while navigating the uncertain and often challenging circumstances of the modern age. My name is Brett Kane, and I'll be your host on this journey as we have a multidisciplinary conversation with a wide variety of speakers from all around the globe. This typically includes spiritual teachers, somatic therapists, artists, environmentalists, just about anyone else who I feel holds a piece to this multifaceted puzzle. For today's episode, we're going to be exploring the vitally important topic of attachment theory with the founder of the Metta Group, George Haas. The goal of this conversation was to help deepen your understanding of what attachment theory has to offer. We generally view it in terms of secure, anxious, and avoidant styles, and then diagnose ourselves and others based on those metrics. The truth, on the other hand, is far, far deeper and more foundational than we tend to give it credit for. Luckily for us, we have folks like George to help walk us through this with skill and ease. So, in case you're unfamiliar with George's work, he's a Buddhist teacher who specializes in bridging Eastern practices with state-of-the-art attachment repair protocols. With his 40-plus years of work with this material, he's gone on to create a unique and clinically effective program to help folks move from disorganized attachment strategies toward secure ones. This means healthier relationships, more energy for playful exploration, and a solid foundation for spiritual development. Beyond the extensive offerings being hosted at Metta Group, he's also the host of a weekly podcast called I Love You, Keep Going, in which he explores these themes in greater detail. I personally found this exchange to be very rich and influential, even in my second listen through that I do for the editing process. There were more than a few times that I had to genuinely pause and reflect on what he was saying, as it contained some spark of inspiration for my own experience. So if you're feeling like this is the kind of work that you're needing to take on, I highly, highly encourage you to check out his programming over at mettagroup.org or listen to his podcast on just about any streaming platform. The links for those will be down in the description. If you like what you hear with this show, consider signing up for my Patreon over at patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. Any amount you're able to contribute is a huge help in keeping the wheels greased and the engine roaring. If money's a bit tight, I totally understand. You're also welcome to subscribe over on YouTube, leaving a comment or a like on the video. We also have an Instagram you can follow or a Facebook you can like. Any and all of these things help us grow the channel and ensure that those who need these conversations have access to them. So once again, thank you so much for listening. Without further ado, please sit back, drink some tea, do some stretches, but most importantly, open your heart for George Haas. Cool. So, George, we are now live. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for giving me some of your time. I know you probably have a pretty busy schedule, so I'm really happy to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
It's Friday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like to say only 2 more working days this week.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. Doing what you do. I'm sure there's never really a full off day.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I invited you on after my roommate had recommended your podcast.
Uh,
And I listened to it for quite a bit, and I really resonated with the messages that you were putting out there. This amazing intersection that you have between Eastern Buddhist practice and this attachment theory that has kind of permeated throughout the pop psychology world, but is actually quite a deep deep world of theory and practice. So, I wanted to start by kind of laying the groundwork out for listeners who might not be familiar with attachment theory, or you for that matter. So, I'd love to hear a little bit of background on how you came to this world of attachment theory and what about it really resonated with you.
um, you know, uh, One of my friends slipped me a bootleg CD of a lecture at the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA of Alan Shore talking about disorganized attachment and the patterns that you're likely to see if you're working with people who have it. And in 10 minutes, he described the pattern of my life, which would have normally made me think, oh, he has intimate knowledge, but it was just so stark that I had been doing those cycles over and over again for all of my life. I'd had it probably 20 years of therapy at that point, and my pattern was completely unfazed by it. I'd done just every possible thing I could think of, and the consensus of the helping professionals at the time was I was just going to have to get used to the way that it was, which is always the problem for people who have, really difficult origins, because it's such a truncated life that we end up with. Uh, and I thought, oh, this is it. I have to go and find some practitioner and begin to, repair my attachment strategy. And this was in the late 90s, and really it had not arisen yet in popular culture. In fact, there was nobody in Los Angeles I could find who really was a practicing therapist who had any knowledge about it at all. But I had gone pretty heavily into meditation practice with Shinzen Young and his community, and I recognized that meditation was well suited to begin to work with these patterns because you could use the patterns as an object of meditation and notice when they arose in your day-to-day life, and so that you could mitigate them at least. And so I began a practice around uh, that. Um, Shinzen at the time was asking his senior students to start teaching, and so I started teaching. And mainly in the beginning, I was teaching Shinzen stuff, but uh, the students would come to me and say, I wanted to study with Shinzen. He's just down the block. I'll go study with Shinzen. But the thing about you that's so interesting is you used to be the angriest person I'd ever met, and now you're not angry anymore. And that would be something that would be interesting to me to learn. So I started to teach a course on overcoming anger. And then somebody came up to me, and one of my students said, anger really isn't the thing for me. Fear is the thing for me. Could you teach on that? So I started to teach a course on fear. And then somebody came up and said, anger and fear aren't my thing. Sadness is my thing. Could you teach a course on sadness? So I started to teach a course on sadness. So I'm having 3 courses now. Then somebody came up to me and said, anger, fear, and sadness aren't my thing. Shame is my thing. Could you teach a course on shame? And then this light bulb went off. Oh, I'll teach a course on overcoming difficult emotions and get everybody in one room. And when I started to do that, people came up to me and said, it isn't the anger, fear, sadness, shame, etc. That's the issue. It's the relationships that cause all of those feelings. And then suddenly I went, everybody's here because of attachment conditioning, and that's really what they wanted. And so I started a class called The Meaningful Life, which was really about how to form relationships. And I went up to Berkeley and studied uh, or did the Attachment Institute with Mary Main and Eric Hesse, and began to do AAIs for people and created these meditation and pathways to investigate attachment conditioning, provided a psychoeducation around attachment conditioning, And at the end of about 5 years of doing that, we did before and after AAIs and realized AAI is the Adult Attachment Interview, which is one of the reliable assessment instruments, that people weren't really changing the automatic side of things. They had a better understanding. They were able to negotiate better functioning relationships and actually move out of secondary exploration into primary exploration. Primary exploration is the exploration where it's just about the meaningfulness of it. It's the thing that provides a sense of purpose to life. And secondary exploration is the gathering of time, energy, and resources, the survival aspect of it. What you find in insecure and disorganized attachment is people are mainly focused on secondary exploration and don't do much primary exploration, which leads to what I call the creeping despair of not really finding life satisfying, even though you're picking up some of the tokens of our late capitalist society.
Yeah, yeah. So, we're getting into some specifics here, but there might be some people who are listening who are very new to you and actually new
Mm,
to attachment theory in general. So I really do want to explore those explorations.
okay.
But for the folks who, yeah, are just kind of unfamiliar with this in general, could you just kind of, I guess, maybe briefly describe just kind of these attachment styles and kind of how they come about?
So you use the word attachment styles, which is the sociological end of it, which is the side that's really grabbed popular attention. And attachment strategy is more on the research side of things, which is more empirical. We tend to like to use the research side, the attachment strategy side, and not so much not so much the attachment style side. Um, and I think the main difference is on the attachment strategy side, the intention really is to do deep work and uproot the native attachment conditioning and earn security. And on the style side, it's to negotiate secure functioning relationships while leaving your native attachment strategy intact.
Wow.
And I think that that works pretty good for two ways we talk about it: is organized people and disorganized people. If you're on the organized side of attachment, so secure or dismissing or helplessly preoccupied adult categories, then that's a workable strategy. But if you're on the disorganized side, fearful, preoccupied, fearful, avoidant, or complexly disorganized, you're not really going to be able to negotiate a secure functioning relationship very well. And so that those strategies don't work. So when you look at the popular culture, it's really mainly focused on negotiating a dismissing and preoccupied relationship and getting that to work. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. When it gets polarized into traits that are organized around sex, which is in the attachment world irrelevant. Uh, it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah.
So I would guess I think that you should negotiate secure functioning relationships, whatever your attachment strategy is, but you should also do the deep work and uproot your native attachment conditioning just because the meaningfulness of life is so much richer.
Yeah, I really appreciate that distinction between the strategy and the style. And again, my understanding outside of your podcast is kind of like the pop psychology that's been memeified and shared on social media, like most people's kind of understanding of it. So, what is it that kind of determines your strategy? Is this just purely kind of early developmental things that happen in your childhood, or is this something that kind of as you get older, you kind of like pile on and learn new things?
Well, we would really talk about it in three distinct areas, but the first one is the early dyadic relationship with your primary caregiver. Uh, the strange situation, which is a way of testing children's attachment orientation. We can test you at 10 months old and uh, determine what your attachment strategy is, and you have a 70% likelihood of using that strategy that you had developed at 10 months old for the rest of your life. So early, yeah, early it happens. If you think about it, You come into the world, you're completely helpless. Your survival depends on the way that people take care of you. You have no references for anything. And you present yourself to the world being other people, and other people respond to you. And the way that they respond to you, you begin to develop a working model of who you are and what your capabilities are, and then also what you can expect from the world. And that really is a way of encapsulating what the attachment conditioning is. If you grow up in a household where you have a caregiver who sensitively attunes to you, who empathetically connects to you, who's interested in what your expression is, takes that in, reflects that back to you, and then responds, right? They respond by taking care of you. That's the thing that infants want. They want to have a sense that they can have some impact on the environment, and that impact will be good for them. If you have that, of course, you develop a sense of being capable, and you develop an expectation that the world will meet your needs, and then you wander around the planet as if that were true.
Mm.
Amazingly.
Yeah.
But if that didn't happen, just missing adults grow up in an environment of profound neglect. Nothing they do triggers a response from the caregivers that they would be able to find useful. And so they abandon all of that authentic expression in favor of the expression that the caregivers demand of. And that requires the shutting down of the attachment system. So they suppress that. But the only way that they can suppress the attachment system is by simultaneously suppressing their awareness of their emotional life because it's too painful. And so what you have in adults are unfeeling, thinking people who really are not oriented in any way toward collaboration or toward a mutual relationship. They're very transactional in the way that they relate to people, whereas secure people are collaborative in the way that they relate. Preoccupied people, it's a chaotic, unpredictable environment that they grow up in. When you monitor the environment that you're in and you notice that you make a flailing gesture like this, you get a blanket, then you begin this process of communicating and understanding if I do this because I'm cold, I'll get a blanket. And if I do something else because I'm too hot, they'll take the blanket away. And so that you can request the care that you need from sensitive, responsive people. But when you grow up in a chaotic environment where they don't monitor your gestures, they just take care of you in the way that they think you should be taken care of, which is haphazard. You don't learn how to communicate in any way, and you become hyper vigilant and just constantly seeking proximity because the care is so unpredictable. And that leads to preoccupation. Then, you have a question?
Nope.
Okay. Then the trauma line falls and disorganization happens. And really, what's happening there is, uh, when the attachment mechanism goes off, it compels you to seek proximity and for protection and physical safety from somebody who will protect you. But when the caregiver becomes the source of the danger, then when the attachment system goes off and you're compelled to seek proximity to the person that is hurting you, the fight or flight mechanism goes off and cancels the attachment demand. And so you have children that are in situations where they have no means of seeking comfort and protection because the caregiver themselves is the cause of harm. In most cases, there's a small subset of people where the anxiety for parenting is so great in the caregiver that when the child empathetically connects to them, they're filled with difficult emotion which they withdraw from. But most of the time, it's because of some kind of danger or harm that they're encountering with the caregiver. So that's the spectrum. Organized, disorganized is one way. secure and insecure. So secure is secure and everybody else is insecure. Organized, secure, dismissing, and I would say helplessly preoccupied. And on the disorganized side, fearfully preoccupied, fearfully avoidant, and then complexly disorganized. People really at the far end from security can exhibit any of the attachment strategies. And so they're very hard to relate to because you can't predict how they're going to respond,
Yeah.
even a little.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems to me that, I mean, these are very like core foundational structures in our cognition. And I know a lot of the times, again, the pop psychology will kind of point to this as like a purely relationship focused thing, like how to have a better relationship by becoming secure. And to me, it feels like does this affect pretty much every aspect of your life? Because it seems as if it would in the way that you approach your career, your creativity, just your ability to move through society in a way. I feel like it does it play into that?
Well, if we talk about it from the Buddhist perspective of understanding the nature of self and reality, we create these views. You know, you have the capacity to sense something, the object can be sensed when there's contact. Consciousness of the sensing experience arises. It's evaluated for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter if we ever get to it? Is there time for something pleasant? And then it's compared to the perceptual database. If there's a meaning in the perceptual database that matches closely enough that undifferentiated sensing experience, then the whole memory thread attaches and it rolls into conceptual reality. Then, if you don't have this capacity to see it as this mind creation, not what's really happening, and you think that this is what's really happening, then you, of course, form an intention and take an action in the world, which puts that stamp on it as this is what's really happening. In each moment, of course, what also opens up is all of the possibilities that you could choose, the whole range of them. But when you get into these limiting views, of course, you don't see the range of possibilities. You only see the things that you imagine are possible. And then you choose from that subset of what you imagine to be possible. If you think that nobody is going to collaborate with you, that you have to take everything that you get, you're not going to see any of the possibilities of collaboration. You're just going to see who you can take from. If you're preoccupied and think that you're completely incapable and somebody has to rescue you, you're only going to see the opportunities where somebody might rescue you. And if you're disorganized and you see the world as malevolent and dangerous and that you're likely to get harmed, that totally affects what you're willing to do, which changes everything. Now, mind you, you could be a secure person, see the situation, see all of the possibilities because you weren't frightened of any of them, and choose lots of different things and create this depth of exploration, this depth of meaning that isn't possible to people when their capacity to generate reality is so constricted.
Yeah. So I guess what's the process, and this is a big part of your life's work, I'm sure, for these people who are experiencing disorganized attachment strategies, I guess, how do you kind of get them into a secure place when it's something that they've never known? Like as an adult, you have so much thick conditioning and kind of habitual energy about the thing. Is it possible to actually shift into something that you've never experienced before?
I just want to grab sick out of your sentence and trash it. This is your conditioning. Uh, it is completely predictable at 10 months old based on your conditioning what that attachment system is going to be. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you adapted brilliantly to the conditions that you had and survived. Disorganized people are amazingly uh, resilient and amazing survivors of just astonishingly difficult circumstances. That it takes a toll on you is completely predictable. That it would do that to anybody.
Hmm.
And so I think that really disorganized people are quite astonishing in the elaborate and complex ways that they figured out how to survive the circumstances that they have, which means they have that capability to get out of these conditioned responses to things. The main way into working with disorganized attachment is to recognize that the intensity of the fearfulness is what drives everything. So I would say organized people are very sensitive to being humiliated, and they would avoid that. But that same level of intensity of avoiding humiliation on the organized side, disorganized people think they're going to be killed,
Wow.
which is a whole different level of fearfulness.
Yeah.
And so, really, you have to come at that fearfulness and develop strategies for emotional regulation so that you can bring it back down into the normal fearfulness of humiliation.
Yeah. 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 Just the regular humiliation we all have to share.
And so that's where you really begin that. Uh, uh, do you know how distorting fear states can be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how extreme the responses to fear states can be. And
Yeah.
so there's that coming into it. Disorganized people hide. That's their main strategy. It's like they take Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, wrap themselves up it, sit in the corner, and then they get furious that you can't see them. Of course,
Mm.
they're completely hidden. And so
Yeah.
then the next part is to begin to be willing to tell people who you are. Now, because they're so well defended, organized people tend to give up in a few layers of defense because they're not getting the rewarding relationship that they want. Predators don't. And so
Mm.
what they also have over and over again is the experience of letting people in and then the abuse being repeated.
Mm.
But that's because the defense systems exclude everybody except for these people who are willing to penetrate the defense in order to get what they want.
Yeah.
And so you have to begin to intentionally make the decision to begin to trust people, but you have to at the same time pick differently. And so there's some education around who to pick and what a secure functioning relationship would look like. The thing about insecure and disorganized people, they grew up in family systems that modeled insecure and disorganized relationships. They don't really have a sense of what secure functioning relationships are supposed to be. And so that's where the psychoeducation piece comes in. So what we're looking at is uh, emotional regulation, understanding how relationships are actually supposed to work. And then the insight or the Vipassana meditation is great at developing mentalizings or metacognition so that you can begin to process fast enough to really move away from pure reaction to situations to actually being able to collaborate. So the diagram for that, I would say, is you understand the meaning that you're giving to what's happening. So that process I went through of object and sensing,
Mm-hmm.
assigning meaning, you're able to understand the meaning that you've given to something. That's the first thing. The second thing is you're able to understand what about that you would like to communicate to someone and how to communicate it to them. You grew up with your definitions of everything, and I grew up with my definitions of everything. And in the process of intimacy is an exchange of what those definitions are. I often use the I love cherries. That's my thing. My favorite fruit. Give me a Bing cherry. I'm happy. But let's say you're indifferent to cherries and you think raspberries are all that.
It's all very true for me, honestly. I don't know what you just did to read that, but accurate.
So I say this is just like cherries, and I'm really excited, and you think, oh, that's ho hum.
Yeah.
Don't want to do that. But if I had said this is just like raspberries, you'd be going, oh, that's great. I'd love to try that. So
Yeah.
you have to transliterate it to the other person's meaning so that they actually can understand you, which means you have to know them well enough, and they have to have told you. And then you have to gather their response, and hopefully they transliterate it. You think I've just said it's just like raspberries, and you say, "Oh, it's just like cherries. That's what you mean." And I say, "Yes, that's what I mean." And then we've understood each other, and then we modify our understanding. So that four pieces: understand where it comes from, understand what and how to express and make sure that you receive the answer and then modify your understanding. That would be the level of mentalizing that you have to do for a secure functioning relationship. If we were to use a preoccupied person as an example whose mentalizing is not capable of doing that, they understand what they want and they make a gesture of expression to see if they can get it. They monitor whether they get it or not, and if they don't, they just re-express it in a slightly modified way to see if they can get it. So that what you notice is from preoccupied people, it's a constant demand that you take care of them, but it's not an authentic expression of what they want, and it's implicit because they're asking you in a way that they think you'll just give it to them without telling you what they need. And then if they if you say no and give them an explanation why, they don't take any of that in. They
Mm.
just notice that they haven't gotten it and re-express. And
Yeah.
so that creates a pattern in a relationship. A secure person does not stick around for that, so that they withdraw from those kinds of relationships. And because there's a demand in it, feeling people don't respond to it. So they end up cycling into relationships with dismissing people because they don't feel any of the demand,
Yeah.
because they suppress their feeling state. So that's how those couplings tend to happen. In order to attract and maintain different kinds of relationships, you have to um, change the foundations.
Yeah.
So,
Is it possible for two people who are kind of experiencing the more preoccupied or disorganized states who are in a relationship, is it possible for them within that relationship to transform those foundational things? Or is this usually best done kind of on your own and then you come back? Or, what would you say to people who are kind of caught in that cycle of relation or relating to each other?
so with new relationships, of course, you can start with a different kind of foundation. If you're already in an existing relationship, then you've made dozens of agreements in the relationship. In the preoccupied dismissing dynamic, usually the dismissing person is quite content with the negotiations that have happened, and the preoccupied person is unable to live with them. So it's the preoccupied person who's demanding that the relational agreements change.
Mm,
The the outcome of that will depend. Dismissing people don't reciprocate in relationships, so that if you ask them to reciprocate, they're not going to do that unless they can see why they would want to do
mm, mhm.
that. And so if you make too many demands in that way, uh, they don't adapt to that really.
Yeah.
Um, the main difficulty for preoccupied people is because the proximity seeking has um, been more important than exploring. They don't really explore very well, so it's very hard for them to figure out how to shift these things
Yeah.
in a balanced and dismissing and preoccupied is the second most common relational formulation.
Hmm.
If the dismissing person takes good enough care of the preoccupied person so they don't burn out, they get more reliable care. So you can make that case to them and that they'll see the advantage of that. If they don't take good enough care of the preoccupied partner burns out, and then they have to get another one. So there's
Mm,
an advantage to them. But to stay in the preoccupied, dismissing dynamic, which many people do, really means that you're unwilling to look at the terrible sadness of the early conditioning.
Yeah.
um, and I admit that it is a terrible sadness.
Yeah. So, this process of looking at that terrible sadness, it kind of seems to me where the Vipassana comes into to be able to actually turn your attention on what's happening inside
Right.
your internal experience. And this is something that I think for a lot of people comes with a lot of challenges, especially people who come from really troubled backgrounds, because some of the energies in there are monstrous. And it can
Yes,
be,
indeed.
you really have to develop a sense of resiliency in meeting that in itself is a practice, which I think is kind of the fruit of Vipassana. But for the people who are unfamiliar with that style of meditation, could you just kind of maybe explain how that works? Like, how do you intentionally practice that in the context of trying to kind of navigate this?
So we teach a metta vipassana, which is an integrated practice of the heart and also of insight into the way that the mind works. Um, if you grow up and the working model of self is uh, lopsided on the negative side of experience too much, then each time the self arises, the way that you know the self is arising is through these strong negative states. And you can easily develop an aversion to that. And I think that the root cause of self hatred is a self structure that is so lopsided onto the negative side, you just can't stand the experience of yourself when it arises, and then you move into an aversion or a self hatred. And so a lot of this in the beginning is to change that orientation so that you embed in the self experience positive experiences. So when the sense of self arises, it's largely a positive experience that you enjoy having. This is the root of self love. And you can do this through a simple meditation practice. Admittedly, a lot of it, but it's still very simple and anyone can do it. You just have to do enough of it. And as you begin to move toward the positive side, then you can safely begin to explore the difficulties that happen to you because you have a natural inclination toward a kindness for yourself, a compassion for yourself, a joyfulness around yourself, which if you don't do that work first, uh, touching into the terrible sadness can be an overwhelming, frightening experience. But what we find in the Metta Vipassana approach is the shift toward positivity in the beginning makes the second part of the investigation possible.
Yeah.
Then you begin to see what happened, depending on what your attachment strategy is. Uh, Dismissing people tend to idealize, and so what we need to take down in that those views of idealization and see clearly what happened. In the preoccupied mind, you're oriented toward uh, the other, and you lose track of yourself. So really, the attention is turning back into who you are and what your capacities are, and what's meaningful to you, away from the attention on the other. Disorganized people, the the real beginning to relationships is to begin to rely on your sense of who will hurt you and who won't. I think that's one of the most profound harms that happen to children that are abused, is that the people that are supposed to be protecting them are the people that have betrayed them and harmed them. And it because most of the time you're seduced into it. We call it grooming, but you're pulled into this using your natural desire for connection and your natural desire for care, and that's corrupted, and so you don't rely on yourself to choose
Mm.
well, and in fact, because you're so defended, the only people that get at you are the ones that are willing to push through all of that.
Yeah.
And so what we begin to do is to repair the confidence that you can tell the difference between somebody who will hurt you and who won't. And mainly that has to do with speed. Secure people go slowly. They expect to know you for a year or two before they make any substantial commitment to you because they want to
Hmm.
see who you are and what you do. And
Yeah.
while it's very easy to fool somebody for a short period of time, it isn't possible to do it that well for that long. And so they go very slowly. Insecure and disorganized people rush in because they're overcome by the abandonment anxiety, and
Mm.
they make commitments in relationships too fast, not because the relationship can support the level of commitment that they're making, but because it quells the abandonment terror. And then they find they're in committed relationships with people who can't possibly hold up their end of the relationship, and it reinforces the belief that nobody is really capable of
Yeah.
caring for me,
Yeah.
or I'm too demanding, which is one of the other sides of it.
Right, right. So when we're talking about kind of applying this metta vipassana to our internal experience, I there's probably going to be some people who are hearing this who are like, "All right, let's go. I'm ready. I'm going to stop this podcast. I'm going to YouTube somebody teaching me some metta." And those those first experiences when you're meeting a moment of yourself that is pained, and you're just like, "All right, I love you."
Right.
I care about you. Like there's almost when you first start, at least from my experience, there was almost this like kind of arbitrary quality to it that was kind of like, who am I fooling? I don't love this. I want to get rid of this. You know, how do how do you work with meta in a way that is authentic to where you actually are, but actually still making kind of those strides, moving toward kind of a self-compassion when you don't feel warm toward it?
So we use metta vipassana, metta jhana. So
Mm,
organizing around high concentration states and organizing around a investigation of view in the Buddhist sense. Most of the loving kindness practice that's taught in the West is what we would call wet metta, which is the intentional generation of positive emotional states. And
hmm.
so we teach a dry metta or dry loving kindness, which is uh, investigating mind states or views. The reason why this is so important for attachment repair is that attachment is a view. And if you can't tell the difference between a view and not having a view, then you can't recognize the attachment conditioning and begin to recognize the distortion. And, it's like the Zen story of the abbot who walks down to the pond and looks in the water and sees the koi, and they swim up. And he says, "How's the water today?" And one of the koi looks at the other and says, "What's water?" Uh, if you've been in the attachment conditioning, which you have before autobiographical memory came on, if it's informed every relationship that you've formed, if it's informed all of the exploration that you have done in your life, how do you see that this is a view and not actually what's real? Uh, if you grew up in a secure household, your caregivers would have said to you, "What's going on with you? Use your words. You seem angry. Are you angry? You seem happy. Are you happy? What's making you happy?" All of those prompts would force you to begin to understand what view is, not only understand what that is, but be able to express it. And in that expression, compare notes with somebody else and understand what their interpretation of the present moment is so that you could see that they were different and that they were reflective of conditioning, and you would get very early on that it's your point of view and it's your definitions and your meaning, and it's not an intrinsic uh, event.
Mm-hmm.
But if you didn't have that, which insecure and disorganized people typically do not have, then you just think that your interpretation is what's happening and that everybody's having the same experience that you are, and so that you can reliably infer what they're thinking and feeling without having to inquire because your perception is accurate. And so we open that up by using loving kindness as a practice where you're focused on and use as the object of meditation the view or the mind state of that. Now, how do you learn that? I think for myself, loving kindness was not one of the views that I was capable of generating when I started the practice, but anger was very reliable. And I said earlier that I used to be really angry, but I'm not so much anymore. And the reason was I began to use the distortion of anger as a way of recognizing a mind state. When you're really angry and you walk into a room, how does it appear to you? And is that different than when you walk into the same room and you're really happy? How does that appear to you? And can you track that? And when the mind is equanimous, the Buddha talked about this using the metaphor of a mirror, 2,600 years ago, that would have been a bowl of water. If the mind is still and the water is still, then you see reflected off the surface an accurate representation of what's happening. We don't ever experience anything directly. We always experience it as a reflection of mind. But if the mind is filled with lust, it's as if the water were dyed a bright color, and then you see the reflection. You know the glow, right? You walk into a room and some people glow and some people don't. And you may think that they're universally appealing to everyone, but that would be wrong. They're appealing to you because of your conditioning. The mind was filled with anger. It's as if the water were boiling. Do you have a sense of how distorting anger is in your ability to perceive? If the mind is filled with restlessness and agitation, it's as if a breeze were blowing across the surface. If the mind is filled with sloth and torpor, it's as if algae had overgrown the bowl. If the mind is filled with skeptical doubt, it's as if the water were muddied. But then I would ask you, can you come up with a metta mind state? Loving, always cool, always kind, open, friendly, curious is how we call it. Can you understand an attachment view? Oh, I'm conditioned to be dismissing in my responses, and my avoidant view is present. And so when I think that you don't matter to me at all, and I'm willing to derogate you, when that mindset isn't there, I'm going to be devastated that you've left, and I'm going to be devastated that I've harmed the relationship which I value so much. But in that moment, it appeared to me to be worthless,
Mm,
and so I responded as if it were. That's what happens when we get caught up in those views,
yeah.
or the helpless view. I can't do it. You can, even though the person in front of you is completely capable. Why wouldn't they be able to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So as we're kind of making this journey into these more secure strategies, and we're opening up to these kind of qualities of exploration, and there's something about authenticity that I think is really interesting, because you know when you're in contact with somebody whether or not they're being authentically them or whether they're not. And this might be a little bit more of a lofty subject to bring up, but I guess what is your take on authenticity and kind of the nature of really connecting to that and being able to express that out into the world?
Well, there is, with authenticity, of course, there is also the issue of consent. Um, you need to have consent from other people to express the depth of authenticity. You have to have their permission to do it. And then they have to have your permission in the demand for your authentic expression, which is, one of the things about consent in insecure and disorganized relationships is the child's consent was not considered. And so insecure and disorganized people have a very challenged relationship with consent. And so you have to repair that as part of the authenticity journey. Disorganized people, of course, have the experience where their consent was trampled and annihilated, and so they really have a hard time with consent. Um, Once you have a sense of consent and that you're willing to inquire to how much intimacy is allowable, then you moderate what's authentic in that framework of consent. In Robin Dunbar's research, he would call it the line. Above the line, you've made agreements with people to be completely authentic with them, which means you're obligated to be completely authentic with them. And people below the line, you're not obligated to be authentic. I think some people confuse this complete disclosure to everyone as a uh, part of authenticity, but it isn't at all. What is uh, appropriate is permissions and consent. If you have a work relationship, it's largely transactional. You're performing a function. The disclosure of all sorts of other stuff is not welcome in that environment, and appropriately not welcome because it's not part of the agreement. But in an intimate relationship where you have made the agreement to be completely disclosing, withholding is not appropriate, right?
Mhm.
I worked in rehabs for 12 years, and I would be talking to the spouse of somebody's spouse, and we would be talking about authenticity. And he said, "I would never tell my spouse that. Do you know what would happen if I gave them a complete picture?" Then you say that, but so then you don't have an intimate relationship,
Mm.
which is part of the dilemma. So, and also that completely open, expressive representation of yourself is of extreme value. And so you need to only disclose it to people who see it as extremely valuable, and not to toss it off onto people who don't regard it well, so that you're not injured by the expression, the authentic expression. But what we're really talking about here is that you give a complete and accurate representation of what your experience of the present moment is. Now that you pull out the scroll of every heinous thing you did and get them to initial each vile entry, right? It's just the complete expression of your experience of the present moment in terms that they will understand what you mean based on the level of consent that you have, and that you're not so frightened of being abandoned by expressing that view that you withhold
Yeah.
when you're not supposed to.
Yeah. So you mentioned the kind of extreme value of your authenticity. What about
Yeah.
it is valuable? I guess what makes it this very special thing that we should be pursuing. And
Because if you're completely open, you're also completely vulnerable to harm. And you need to be cognizant of that. You need to be self caring in that. You can't uh, make yourself vulnerable to somebody who then harms you, because the repercussions of that is that you can't then make yourself available to anyone.
yeah,
We are not meant to live alone. We are meant to live in complex social groups. We're not meant to live in harsh and critical environments. We're meant to grow and thrive in environments of people who think we're awesome, who delight in us, who are eager to hear what our experience is, and who are willing in exchange for that to offer their intimate experience of their own life. And what you find from that, of course, is this richness that is simply unavailable if you don't do it. You have your perspective, you have your conditioning, you see everything in the way that that allows you to, and somebody else sees it in the way that they're allowed to. And the exchange of those two points of views creates an unfathomable depth of experience that is completely unavailable to you if you just rely on your own point of view.
yeah,
How do you understand this life that we have, this crazy, wild human life that we have, if you're just stuck in your own point of view? You can't see anything.
yeah, yeah. Phone's going crazy right now. So, God, it's really blowing up.
Well, it's not unexpected. Inequality always leads here.
Yeah,
I don't know who they were fooling. Certainly not anybody who's
yeah,
paying attention.
yeah. So there was one thing that I wanted to bring up before we kind of come to a close, and as somebody who is a spiritual practitioner such as yourself, something that I've thought about is just kind of the nature of these attachment strategies in relation to kind of spiritual pursuit. Because I mean, it's a very open thing that anybody can and probably should participate in. But I'm curious how these attachment strategies can maybe change the way that we begin and pursue our spiritual practice. Is it I guess, advised for somebody who's kind of in these more disorganized states to begin something like this? Or is there a chance that there's potential for harm or confusion or anything like that?
Well, we think of the attachment work as the preliminary practices. I know in the West, because we're so affluent and we're, at least some of us have some modicum of education, although we have thoroughly gutted the public education system to limit that as much as possible. Um, and I don't necessarily think that you need to have it, but what it does is produce an arrogance where we think that because we're rich, we don't have to do the beginning. We can just skip to the advanced part,
Yeah.
which produces terrible practice in a lot of people. um, but in avoiding the preliminary practices, particularly with the Eastern stuff, you also avoid rooting through a lot of this stuff that then becomes an impediment later in your practice. And so we like to recommend the attachment work as uh, the preliminary practices so that you can resolve a lot of the attachment difficulties, but also form collaborative relationships which will be invaluable to supporting the advanced spiritual practices, which we also think that you should do and think is one of the primary sources of exploration. So
Mm-hmm.
primary exploration, certainly. Um, the and it doesn't take that long to do it. A couple of years of preliminary practices, and then you can sail along in your spiritual endeavors.
Yeah, that's something that I think in our fast-paced society and the social media age that the length of time, it's not an immediate thing. And I think our dopamine systems are kind of trained at this point for
Right.
the next easiest, quickest possible thing. But whenever we're talking about these kinds of practices, it's a little bit of a long view. I mean, even a couple years, someone's like, "Oh, well, I don't know, I guess I'll just go take a
Yes, it's
Xanax
so much
instead."
easier to have a lifetime of suffering than it is to do a couple of years of preliminary practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for some people, because it does. I mean, to be fair, it does take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of kind of the willingness to face down the things that are are kind of haunting you, and there's a lot of psychic resistance
Mm.
that a lot of people can develop
Well, I
against those
think also
things.
what's different now, this is the first time that there's been a reliable system for changing your attachment conditioning. Prior to this, it was simply frustrating because it didn't change. I mean, it was really slow. So when I say 2 or 3 years, this is miraculous
Hmm.
compared to the
Yeah,
10 or 15 years to make very little progress that it took before. This is totally different.
yeah. So there's no pills that
So
I can take to.
we, well, you've noticed a resurgence in psychedelia,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. You're right.
Hilariously.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll do it one time and I'll have the opening of self, and then
Yeah.
the 28th time that you're doing it, it's really just addiction. What can I tell
Yeah.
you?
Well, you heard it here first, folks. And the podcast sphere is going to be really upset by that. They love them some psychedelics.
But also understand that big pharma is the pusher of this. So if you
Hmm.
think that their motives are spiritual, good luck with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, we are coming up on time, and I want to respect
mm,
your schedule. So I do want to give you a moment, though, to kind of just share how people can stay plugged in. I mean, you have such a depth of understanding for this
mm,
material that you could really spend, again, years kind of just
yeah.
taking in just you and what you have going on. So where can people plug into your work, maybe get engaged with you, or kind of plug into what you have?
Well, we have a podcast called I Love You, Keep Going, which I think is pretty good. We talk about this intersection between attachment conditioning and meditation. I have 7 levels of engagement. We do workshops. Mostly we do things around how to date like a secure person, even if you're not secure yet. is one we do. We do. So that's our level 0, and then level 1 is this sort of, I like to say, skipping the stone across the pond of this material, so that you get a breadth of what it is without actually having to go deep. So you do a level 1, and it's 3 Saturday mornings, so 9 to 1 Pacific time. You'll get you'll get the whole perspective and understand what needs to happen, and then you can make a decision about doing a deeper dive. If you decide to do a deeper dive, level 2 goes really into it. So that's a class that meets twice a month for 6 months, and we really go into the mentalizing and emotional regulation, understanding what attachment conditioning is, understanding what secure attachment is, and then moving in that direction. If you level 3 is for people who are insecure, disorganized, who want to earn secure attachment, and so that's the main focus, and that's a one-on-one work with a facilitator, mainly doing ideal parent figure protocol, which is this new technology that really changes things rapidly. Level 4 is for people who have earned security or who have native security with features. You can be secure with a lot of dismissing or secure with a lot of preoccupied features. And that's really organized around forming and maintaining collaborative relationships, and also developing primary exploration. We think that that's a beginning level of mentalization. And so level 5 is for people who are in committed relationships who are having trouble renegotiating attachment understandings. If you come into to do the attachment work and you begin to change your attachment strategy, you're going to have to renegotiate all of your attachment relationships with everybody. And often when you're in a committed, intimate relationship, quote unquote, your partner isn't so keen on changing if they're not doing the work, and you can get into trouble there. So that's what that is. And then level 6 is intermediate and advanced mentalizing and metacognition, which is organized around primary exploration. I do those in half days. There's one actually coming up in June, a half day on intermediate mentalizing, and then a half day on advanced mentalizing.
Yeah.
So
amazing.
At the end of the advanced track is the spiritual awakening. So
yeah,
keen on that.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for offering all of that. And again, one more time, thank you for joining me on the show and just sharing some of your insights into this world, because it really is so needed right now. When you look out at the country, United
Yes,
States, it
indeed.
is like, oh, people need to hear about this.
Yes. Good.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. Bye. All right, everybody, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. I truly do make this show for you. Once more, that was George Haas from Metta Group. If you want to stay plugged into his work and dive in a little bit more thoroughly, head on over to mettagroup.org or go listen to his podcast at I Love You, Keep Going. That is going to be wherever you stream your podcast. It is a good one. It's one of the few that I still listen to regularly. So that is the endorsement that you're looking for, then there it is. If you want to support this show, you can head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism and consider signing up. It is a huge help to the show and lets me know that you're out there and you're vibing with what I am putting out. If money's a little tight, that is okay. You can also subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, or like us on Facebook. Again, George Haas, you can give him a round of applause. Do whatever you need to do to celebrate the conversation that just happened. I had a great time with it. So that's going to be it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next episode.